Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Change that intro to if you're interested in real estate or anything politics or geopolitical, and John Rubino. We need to just add that. That would flow really nice as an intro. Happy Tuesday, everyone. We are excited about our guest tonight. If you don't know who he is, you're going to love him. He has been live with us before. We have also pre-recorded some shows with John. And I just want to say, and I'm not just plugging him, I just want to say that you all will want to cruise over to his Substack. And we're going to talk about some of his writing tonight. But amazing guy, amazing guest. John, welcome to the show, man. It is so good to see you, my friend.
Hey, Todd. Hey, Melissa. Good to see you guys again.
Yeah, we're excited. What's the weather like out west where you are?
It's getting gorgeous, finally. Where I am in the Pacific Northwest, winters are, they're not scary or anything, but they're dreary. And we're just coming out of that right now. So I am so ready. I have 20 trips all scheduled, at least in my own mind, for the next 6 months to get out into the pretty places that I haven't explored yet.
I thought you were going to say all in your backyard.
It's nice back there too, but there's other things on the list.
Well, I have to tell you, when I'm thinking about, and this is totally irrelevant, but Rachel Carlson wrote a book called Silent Spring. And it's about pesticide use. It has nothing to do with the housing market. But when I think of what's going on right now in the housing market, all I can think of is silent spring. This is like the spring that isn't. The weather's getting nice outside. The housing market is terrible. It's still unaffordable. We are seeing where price reductions are happening in a lot of the country. We're not seeing a whole lot of it here in Maryland. We're still seeing an inventory shortage, which is really a surprise, but we are seeing something very interesting that finally is starting to show up. The what I call the crooked media or mainstream media, the one that suppresses information and only likes to tell you things that are what they want to push out. It seems like so many things are hidden from us. We don't hear about the loan defaults and the loans being bundled up by Fannie Mae and sold off to buyers of these at a discount of these bundles of non-performing loans or reperforming loans. We don't hear anything about what's really going on with the economy, other than stories like, retail numbers have never been better. And they don't say that along with that is everybody's throwing their debt on credit cards. We don't hear the truth about it. We hear one-sided narratives and stories, but it's very interesting. And we will talk about it tonight that we actually, and I have 3 articles pulled up where they're talking about the new housing market, where cracks have finally showed up. And inventory, we are seeing a major downturn in new construction starts, as well as new permits being pulled. And for those of you that have followed along with us with this housing market stuff, you know that it always happens first in new construction. So now that we're starting to finally see the cracks happening, or at least they're reporting it. It's been happening. Last October, we saw one of the worst new construction statistics, saying that the price declines were really major last fall, but they kind of smooth right over that. Those details, and you hear people like Barbara Corcoran and those like her that are saying, if you don't buy now the housing market, you're going to be sorry, and that as soon as these interest rates come down, of course they're only going up right now with the 10-year Treasury hitting 5%, which is crazy. So now we're finally starting to see what we've been telling you is coming for quite some time. But we're going to dive into some other important topics with John. But Melissa,
hello,
good to
Todd.
see you as always.
Good to see you.
Like I haven't seen
as
you
well.
in a while.
I know. It's been just a little bit since earlier
2
today.
hours.
Yeah, 2 hours, exactly. Hi, everyone. Great to be here this evening. And John Rubino, so happy to have you back again. So fortunate that you are our guest. Looking forward to seeing what you have to say, especially about everything political, what's going on with our world. There's a lot going on, and it all trickles down to what we're seeing in the housing market as well. I know personally I saw gas prices on the rise today, and I think that unfortunately we'll have more of that in the future.
Drones being shot out of the sky.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
But
well,
everyone,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
never a
please,
shortage of things to talk about.
Terrible.
yeah.
Terrible.
Please let us know your questions for John, and I'll be happy to get them answered for you.
Yeah. So, John, tell everybody who you are, man. I could do it for you, but I may miss a thing or two. So just let everybody know what we are in store for here tonight.
Okay, I'll give you the super short version of kind of a winding story of my life. I'm a finance geek. I was on Wall Street for about 10 years as a financial analyst, then started writing and was a tech stock analyst during the tech stock bubble, and then set up a site called dollarcollapse.com, ran it for about 15 years, just sold it. Now I'm on Substack with a newsletter that is aimed at actionable ideas for getting through what's probably going to be a really crazy decade. And there's no shortage of those either.
Yeah. The last time that we spoke, we were talking about the debt crisis, some of your opinion on where things were headed. It's been, 3 or 4 months, John. Has your outlook gotten better, or is your, sort of your thoughts coming true?
Yeah, it's all the bad stuff coming true because we're continuing to borrow more money. Week after week, year after year, the U.S. government debt is basically going straight up now. It's going parabolic, in part because we borrowed way too much money in the past at extremely low interest rates, and now we're raising interest rates, and that's making the government's debt more expensive. So we're paying $1 trillion a year right now just in interest, and that's going to go up to 1.6 trillion. In 2025, which means basically we're running crisis level government deficits just to pay our interest. And there's a term called a zombie company. That's a company that can't survive, can't even pay its own interest out of the money it takes in. And we're creating governments around the world that are kind of in that situation now, where their interest expense is starting to approach their tax revenues. And that's the death knell for a government when it happens. And it's starting to happen around the world. And the US is marching along with some of the other ones heading in that direction. So things are not getting better. They're getting much worse. And it's playing out kind of as expected because there aren't really that many other ways for it to play out. Once you start borrowing a huge amount of money that you can never hope to pay off, you only have a couple of options. And we're in the 2-option phase of this now, where we have to decide between a 1930s style deflationary crash where we default on all our debt, get rid of it that way, or some kind of Weimar Germany-ish hyperinflation where we inflate our debts away. And that's it. Those are our choices. And one or the other is going to be picked in the next few years, and it'll play out in the few years after that. And that's what we have to look forward to. And it's terrifying. Well, it's fascinating from the point of view of, an economics nerd, somebody who really is interested in how these things play out. But it's terrible for everybody else. It's going to be a terrifying 5 or 10 years. And for a lot of people, very destructive. Lives will be destroyed by the financial crisis that our past mistakes will bring into being pretty soon.
You say it's fascinating for scholar economists. We were talking a little while ago, and I was telling you that I had podcasted with Steve Hanke. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins, and he had some very interesting things to say. Actually, that video comes out this Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. But we were talking, John, about. I was getting his opinion on whether he thought that the U.S. was unraveling, and he thought that it was. And we were talking about exactly what you said. When you look at the Great Depression, when you have such an expansion of money supply like we experienced during 2020, 2021. He said that there's only ever been, since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, that we've only had 4 contractions of the money supply. And of each one of those contractions, we have had recessions, or we had the Great Depression. And this is the 5th time, according to him, that it's ever happened, that we're now starting to see this contraction of the money supply. But we also spoke about things that were kind of scary. We were talking about how empires fall. And that's one of your substacks. I want to cover, how countries go bankrupt, and we're going to talk about that tonight, the 10 steps that you wrote about with that. But we were talking about the dollar being the reserve currency, and he referred to it as the dollar being the king. And we've had kings before in history. And I think he said 14 kings, and basically talking about currency, money. And he was talking about the dollar, and he said that with the U.S., he was talking about how the dollar was being weaponized, and with all these sanctions, and now that we're seeing this unravel, with Russia and China, and and the BRICS nation that is rising up to create this other currency to knock down the dollar. And I saw another interesting fact. And I've said it on my show before, but when we looked at oil trade in the global economy, oil trade prior to last year, for a very long time, it was all traded using the U.S. dollar. But in 2023, a fifth of the trade was not. They didn't use dollar currency. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. Any thoughts on that? Did you know that?
That the dollar is losing its preeminence in
that
trade?
too, but just the fact that the oil trade in 2023, that a fifth of the oil trades did not use the U.S. dollar, where it had for what we would consider as forever in our lifetime.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. Basically, the story with regard to the dollar and oil is that back in the 1970s, Henry Kissinger visited Saudi Arabia and cut them a deal. We the U.S. would protect them militarily, and they would only take dollars for their oil. And that created something called the petrodollar, which was one of the reasons that the dollar was the dominant currency in the world ever since, is that if you needed oil, and you do need oil, you had to get dollars in order to buy that oil. So everybody had to have dollars. So all the world's central banks loaded up on dollars as their reserve assets, and every big trading company had to have a big dollar balance because they were going to need it. And so the dollar was an incredibly strong currency because it was in extremely strong demand around the world. Now, we abuse that privilege. Having the world's reserve currency gives you incredible power. And we took that power and we used it like a club to bully other countries. And we used it as a weapon. If you did something that the American empire didn't like, they would kick you out of the SWIFT global bank settlement system, or they would sanction some of your products so they couldn't be sold in different places, and they could just break your economy. Or they would send the CIA in to destabilize you and replace you with a dictator or something like that. But basically, we did that, and we have continued to do that since the 1970s, and it's just getting worse. So rising powers like China and Russia and India are kind of understandably frustrated by being second-class citizens due to the dollar's reserve currency status, and they're looking for ways around the dollar. So they're cutting deals with each other where they use rubles and yuan for trade between China and Russia, and they use the Indian rupees for other kinds of trade. And it's kind of patchwork. It's not this big overarching global trade policy, but country by country, bilateral deal by bilateral deal, they're bypassing the dollar. So the dollar's role in trade is shrinking. It's still dominant, and it'll continue to be dominant for a long time. But it's not as dominant as it once was, and the trend is pretty clear that it's heading in the direction of countries bypassing the dollar on a larger and larger scale, and that weakening the U.S.'s ability to use the dollar as a weapon. So it's a long-term process, and it's not going to complete itself within a year or 2 years or 5 years, but we're headed in that direction. So it's something everybody should understand, and they should understand what the BRICS nations represent. That's a really loose coalition of countries that are kind of frustrated with the US and would like to be out from under dollar hegemony. So they're cutting those trade deals with each other, and they're talking about maybe setting up some kind of a currency that's backed by gold that they can use for trading with each other, and they're buying a lot of gold. Right now, one of the reasons that gold is going up is that central banks in the East, not the West, but China and Russia and India and central banks like that are buying a lot of gold. And that's pushing the price of gold up, but they're still buying, because they have geopolitical reasons to own gold. It's not a trade where they're hoping to make some money and then bail out. They want to accumulate something other than the dollar as a reserve asset to back up their currencies. And they're choosing gold for that. So this is, like I said, long-term process, not going to happen overnight, but it's a very big trend that's heading in a really ominous direction from the point of view of U.S. global dominance.
Any thoughts on what's going on in the Middle East right now?
It's terrifying on a lot of different levels because, all right, first of all, the Middle East is where a lot of oil comes from. Now, this is kind of weird for the U.S. because we're deeply involved in protecting Israel and trying to suppress the expansionist plans of other countries in the Middle East. But we really don't need their oil. The U.S. is almost energy self-sufficient, but Europe is not. Yeah, almost. But and the reason we're not completely self-sufficient isn't because we're not producing enough oil, is that we're not producing enough of the right kinds of oil to feed all of our refineries. So we have to buy certain kinds of oil from overseas. At the same time, we're selling some kinds of oil overseas. So it's it's not really that threatening, because if we needed to, we could just set up refineries that use the kind of oil that we produce and natural gas, of which we produce immense amounts, and we could be completely energy self-sufficient. So what we're doing basically in the Middle East is protecting Europe's energy supply, which is kind of strange when you think about it. You would think they would be protecting their own energy supply, but that's what's happening. Okay, that on one level, that's very scary, because if the war spreads and the oil supply from Saudi Arabia and Iran is interrupted, then we could see oil spike to $150 a barrel. That would be a crisis for the global economy. But that could happen very easily. It's happened.
That would affect us, right? I mean, that would, even despite our ability to fund our own supply or produce our own supply, however it would work its way through, we're going to see it at the pump.
Yeah, if the global price of oil goes up, then that affects us too. It's true, and that would be really inflationary for us here right now, which we can't handle. The average American family cannot handle more inflation right now, because their cost of living has already gone up by 30% in the past 4 years. So more than that would be destabilizing, and so that's one issue, and it would cause equities bear markets all around the world. It would just crash stocks, probably cause interest rates to go back up. And now what does that sound like? It sounds like the 1970s, doesn't it? Which was most of our listeners are not old enough to remember the 1970s. And I unfortunately am, I remember it pretty well. Yeah. And, that was a time when the dollar was tanking and inflation was spiking and interest rates went up to like 18% in some cases. And then the end of that, in the early 1980s, was a massive recession with a big drop in stock prices. So that would be really destabilizing too. And that's totally conceivable if the Middle East blows up and oil spikes. And the final reason why this is so scary over there is that because the US and Israel are becoming isolated around the world. And that's very dangerous. We kind of, we've been as safe as we have been over the last 30 or 40 years because we've had coalitions that we more or less could trust, and they could more or less trust us. And that kept the world relatively peaceful. It wasn't peaceful, but it was less peaceful than the World War I, World War II, 50 years. And that could fall apart if the U.S. and Israel are so isolated by this that nobody wants to be on our side geopolitically anymore. So all of that stuff, oil spiking and a broader Mideast war and the U.S. being isolated, that's all at risk right now in the Middle East. So that's a very scary situation.
Well, I know however this plays out, it could be very bad for this election year for the current administration, no doubt. I mean, the last thing you want as a president trying to be reelected is an economy that's falling apart or inflation that's running away. We know inflation it's not really coming down. I mean, I don't know what, you can talk about how it is coming down, and we're at 2% or whatever. It's not coming down. I mean, prices are high, and people are strapped financially. We're seeing it. We're really seeing the housing market tank, man. I mean, it is getting so slow. We are seeing, I started off talking about how we have like a silent spring going on. The inventory is still not coming on the market, and buyers are just, so many of them are just saying, forget it. We're kind of throwing in the towel for now. So we'll see. I don't know what's going to happen as we get closer to the election, but I want to go over some. I tell you, and I love your Substack. And guys, if you don't know John Rubino, get to know him. I subscribe to his Substack, which I highly recommend you do as well. If you're interested in what John has to say, you can tell he's very up to date on what's happening right now, current stuff that's affecting us Americans. There you go. Joe pulled up his Substack there. But I want to talk about some of when I'm reading some of it, I'm like, I see everything kind of deteriorating around us. And sometimes I feel like, I don't know, I just need to stop talking about it, or maybe just go on vacation or something. But I'll probably be disappointed if I do, because I won't like the restaurant service that is out there right now, or the food that's being prepared, or the attitudes of a lot of the workers. And it sounds very negative, but if you guys, I mean, it's so much is going on. It's like I feel like something major is about to happen or change, because it almost feels like it has to. But when I read some of your Substack, it's so eye-opening, because what I'm thinking or what I'm seeing, it actually gets confirmed in your work, John. And and this has nothing to do with John. We're not promoting this guy, but I've known about this guy, Martin Armstrong, and I want to talk about him a little bit. I've been trying to get him on the show. If you guys are out there, or Martin, you're listening, I'd love to have you on our show. But Martin Armstrong, John, I'm going to let you sort of talk about him, because you wrote about him last year, and we started off the show, you and I, they put him in prison. They locked this guy up. I don't know if he was ever formally charged or whether he was just able to walk scot-free, but tell everybody a little bit about Martin Armstrong, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about what you have written here and sort of like his quotes. So what you told me, the guy developed some kind of an algorithm or program that predicted bad events, right? Maybe good events too, but.
Yeah, he's an economic consultant who has a really good track record for predicting big events going back a couple of decades. And you could call it an AI. He calls it an AI, and I don't know for sure, exactly what form that takes. But he says it puts us firmly in a war cycle right now, which is a time when, when what's happening today happens, only on a much bigger scale. So we're not going to settle the things that are happening out there right now. They're probably going to get worse. New kinds of conflicts are going to come. And that's basically just the cycle that we're in right now. And he says, now here's where it gets interesting from, I guess, from my point of view, because I've disagreed with him over the years about this, and I've always been wrong. He's always been right. But he says the U.S. is the cause of a lot of the trouble in the world. We're run by neocons, neoconservatives, who basically believe that the U.S., with 5% of the world's population, should rule the world. And their plan is for us to fight a series of wars in which we take out the other major players like Russia and China, and then we basically just enslave them. We use their resources, we use their workforces to run a global US-led empire, okay? Those are the people in charge of our government right now, according to Martin Armstrong. And that's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
Yeah. Now, but here's where it's counterintuitive. He says that, yeah, this is all happening. It's mostly driven by the US, but it's good for the US stock market, because trouble in the rest of the world sends capital out of the place where there's trouble and into the US, because we're still seen as the safe haven for global capital. So let's say we pick a fight with China, okay? The Chinese millionaires and billionaires move their money out of China because they don't want to be there if there's a war. Well, where are they going to go? They're going to go to the US. So they're going to buy blue chip US stocks. And that's going to drive the big US stock indexes up. So even while all this trouble is going on around the world caused by the US, we're going to have a rip-roaring bull market in US equities.
Is that what's been happening?
When
you look at the stock market and you're thinking, how could this possibly be? We're in an everything bubble. You think that's why, because everybody else is seeing what's happening and going on, and they're putting their money in our stock market.
Yeah, and in our real estate market. They're out there buying U.S. and Canadian farmland hand over fist and Miami condos. And, one of the things that's making our housing market so difficult for so many people is that there are a lot of absentee owners out there where they're not trying to live in that Miami condo. They just want to park their money in that building. So they buy a condo, leave it empty on the assumption that, it'll be worth something at some point, because it'll have a dollar value, and that's more than you can say for a condo in Sichuan or someplace like that, in China or in Brazil or in Russia. And that capital coming in raises asset prices in the US. It makes it look like we're booming, and we really are, but that's why. It's not because we're such a healthy economy. It's because the whole rest of the world is in even worse shape, and they're sending their money here, And so far, Martin Armstrong has been right about this. And I got to say, I would have more money today if I'd listened to the guy, because I
want to read a couple of these things. Yeah. Everybody, are you prepared for this? This is crazy stuff, man. It's politics. The volunteer military is collapsing. So they are going to offer citizenship to illegal immigrants in return for enlisting. If that doesn't work, they'll just draft them. They'll also start letting non-citizens vote to flip red states blue in 2024.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? That stuff is happening, or it's on the verge of happening as we speak,
Also says, our computer says we'll be lucky to have an election in 2024, and there's no chance it will be legitimate. Biden is just a placeholder. The neocons are in charge now. This is their Christmas Day parade. They're finally at the point where they think they can break Russia and conquer it.
Yeah. And clearly that's been our objective with Ukraine and everything. We've expanded NATO right up to Russia's border after promising not to do that, and then in, I want to say 1991, it's right around there, we put in writing a promise that if Russia allowed the two parts of Germany to unite, that NATO would not expand 1 foot beyond that piece of land. And immediately we started bringing in countries that were between Germany and Russia into NATO, that's an anti-Russia military alliance. And so we've moved Ukraine, or we've moved NATO right up to Russia's border, and Ukraine is the last straw. Putin has been saying all along, listen, we have a military base here. This is the corridor through which many invasions have happened in the past. And Russia, you get past Ukraine, it's just flat ground all the way to Moscow. So a tank army or horseback army in the past was able to basically sweep across Russia and almost conquer it over and over again. So they needed defensible borders. And they've said this, that that's a red line. So the US basically invited Ukraine into NATO. Russia invaded Ukraine, and we have the war that we have today. But you can make the case that that's what the US wanted all along. They pushed Russia into a fight that the US thinks they can win, and in that way take over Russia. And then they get the biggest trove of natural resources that exists on Earth. So it's a prize. It's understandable that the crazy people running our country would like to gain Russia's natural resources, but it'll come at the cost of a nuclear war. And they don't seem to care about that. That's what's so weird about this. It's not like they're going to survive and their kids are going to survive a global nuclear war either, although maybe they think they will. They've got these bunkers and these compounds in New Zealand. It could be that they just plan on taking us right to the edge of war and then disappearing, going into their underground bunkers, and then letting things work out and then re-emerging to repopulate the world. Sounds like Dr. Strangelove, that movie that was way ahead of its time. But yeah, I can't explain this from a psychological standpoint because it doesn't seem like the actions of sane people, but it is explainable. Their actions are explainable with that strategy in mind. So it does seem like that's why they're doing what they're doing.
Other than propaganda, and maybe this is propaganda, I have no idea, but I've heard that Russia's all but won the Ukraine war.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
They kill 500,000 men or something like that. And I don't know it's just what I hear. But I hear that they're they could take them over literally at any time at this point.
Here's what's so creepy about this. You get these monsters like Lindsey Graham and any number of other people who are in charge of the government right now. And they say things like, this is a great deal for us because all we're doing is sending, 1/8 of the military budget over to Ukraine, but we're using up half of Russia's military to fight this war. This is money well spent. But they don't include in their equation the 500,000 dead Ukrainians, right? So that's just a proxy army. Those guys are just cannon fodder, and they mean nothing to the guys in charge of the U.S. military industrial complex, and that's terrifying because, to the extent that they don't care about the Ukrainians as they try to engineer a nuclear war, they basically don't care about our kids and grandkids either, because they're the ones who will either be drafted into the next war or who will die in it one way or another. And it's horrifying. And anyhow, Martin Armstrong gets that exactly right. He's been right about this for a long time.
He also says the real rate of inflation is 26%. The CPI has been revised countless times. They replaced home prices with rent, then put in controlled rents from New York City.
Yeah, here's how inflation statistics have evolved over the past few decades. Back in the 1980s, we created basically a basket of goods that people use in their day-to-day lives, and we monitored the price changes in that basket of goods. And the numbers were kind of unacceptable. So we did what Martin Armstrong said. We basically took housing out of the consumer price index. And then that still wasn't good enough. So we instituted something called hedonic adjustments, where if you buy a computer this year that costs a little more than the computer you bought 5 years ago, but it's more powerful, what the government does is say that the price of the computer actually went down because they measure it in computing power. And, there's something to be said for that, intellectually and intuitively, but it's a black box. So they can make that adjustment any way they want to and come out with any result that they want. And then another thing called substitution is where, okay, if the price of steak goes up, they don't just report the price of steak and include that in the CPI. What they do is they replace it with chicken or some other perceived to be lesser thing, so that, the price of your life doesn't go up all that much, but the quality of your life goes down. So you add all that together and you get today's inflation numbers, which are nowhere near as high as they would be if we were just using 1980s techniques. There are a lot of different estimates of what it would be, but a lot of them cluster around twice as high as today. In other words, today's 3.5% official inflation would be 7 or 8%. And that would be debilitating. That's a crisis level of inflation that would cause all kinds of financial collapses out there if we reported it that way. But people who have to buy groceries kind of see it that way, right? The price of a static basket of groceries went up by about 30% in the last 3 years. And that's why the pollsters are so confused about why people are so frustrated with today's economy, because the unemployment rate is low and inflation is only 3%, but they leave out that the actual cost of living is up by 30%. And a lot of people already in, say, 2019 were having trouble making ends meet. Putting gas in the car, feeding the kids, paying the rent. That was already hard for them. Now the cost of that went up by a third. You've got a lot of people out there who have to choose between paying the rent this month, feeding their kids, and putting gas in the car so they can get to work. They can't do all of those things. So naturally, those people are frustrated. And that shows up in polling when people say, we're going in the wrong direction. It was better 3 years ago under Trump than it is now under Biden. And then somebody like Paul Krugman at the New York Times comes out and says, well, people are just ignorant. They don't know how good they've got it, but they know how good they don't have it. And that's why it's so frustrating right now. But it's being hidden because our inflation numbers are being falsified, basically.
Yeah. I think people are starting to wake up, though, and realize, like you said, that they just don't have any money and that they're financing everything. I mean, how does that food taste at 5 times the amount of its actual inflated cost when you put it on your credit card and you can't pay your monthly credit card bill and you're paying your minimum payment and you're taking your credit cards to the max? And that's what's happening. I mean, we're seeing a lot of it. I talked to a lot of loan officers, John, and they're telling me that they are seeing credit reports they've never. The debt is out of control. The amount of credit card debt.
Yeah, you basically nailed it there. What people are doing who can't afford their day-to-day life is they're putting it on plastic. So credit card debt is soaring, and a growing number of people are having to carry credit card balances month to month, which means they're paying interest of 20 to 25% on their loans. And that's a recipe for bankruptcy, right? You can't exist if you're paying 25% on your debts, and your debts are going up every month. So that's what's happening to a lot of people. And there's a stat for that. It's called personal interest expense. And that, in other words, that's the amount of interest that regular people have to pay each month on the various debts that they've taken on. And that's going parabolic. It's going straight up. It was $300 billion a year not very long ago. Now it's $600 billion a year and climbing straight up. So it's not going to be long before it hits $1 trillion a year of just interest that regular people have to pay. And at that point, society collapses. It's not like we'll get to where a lot of these charts show us going, because before we get there, things will just blow up. And that personal interest expense stat is one of the key indicators of how much time we have left. And I think it's not much.
Well, give us some kind of an example. When you say we don't have much time left, I mean, what are you talking about? And look, it was just announced Plan B of the student debt forgiveness, where it's a little more narrow in parameter, but certainly a lot of student debt will probably be wiped away. These are loans that, I mean, people took them out, man. Come on. You owe the debt. You owe the debt. We have a record amount of people living in houses that aren't paying their mortgage that they agreed to pay. I mean, they signed a contract. I'd like to sign a contract for a house and then in a couple years have a third of the balance taken off and cashed into the back of it with an interest-free mortgage for 30 years. Hey, why not? That's a great idea. I get it. It's not nice to say to people, oh, you screwed up and you have to leave the house and figure out what you're going to do. Yet we have record levels of homelessness because we have no houses available. One of the reasons we have mental illness through the chart, off the chart. But yet again, we're saying, hey, well, I get it because we have people running the country that there are no consequences for them. I mean, they can deficit spend all day long. You don't have to balance budgets anymore. What's that? We're just going to create these bailouts. But when you say we don't have very long and we talk about things unraveling, I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, you think we're going to see something in the next year or two, or are you talking a decade from now? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's an old saying that with predictions, you should name a thing or a time, but not a thing and a time. And I've learned that painfully in the past. So I have no idea when this stuff is going to happen. I actually thought that around 2005, 2006 was going to be the end. Basically, when the housing bubble burst in 2008, let's say, that we wouldn't be able to recover from that. And we did. We took on another 20 or so trillion dollars of debt in the US, and we bought ourselves another decade, but at the cost of being even more deeply in debt. So
we bailed out bad actors.
Everybody. Were you around in the business then, Todd? Do you remember them bailing out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? And
yes.
These guys who should have been allowed to go bankrupt.
Yes. And, I remember AIG.
Oh,
I mean, we're talking about people that were taking vacations, man. They were taking bonuses. They were celebrating. I mean, it blows me away. One of the things Steve Hanke and I were talking about earlier today was, he was talking about how Silicon Valley claims that they're the savior of all of this economy, right? This debt that they're going to add, 6%. Growth, basically, where traditionally we're 2% annual, that they're going to 6% growth through AI because they're developing all these programs. And I said to him, wait a minute, time out. Silicon Valley was bust. They were broke when SVB was going down. That was Silicon Valley's money. They would have been, see you later, bankrupt. Now they're going to save the world, but their money was in a bank that was failing. That did fail. The third largest bank failure in the history of U.S. banking. I'm just amazed at the bailouts. I've never seen such a thing where you could be so fiscally irresponsible and yet we're paying for your, and then the Fed and the Treasury Department says that we're not penalized. It's not taxpayers' money that goes to these bailouts.
This is okay. These guys are the smartest people in the world on Silicon Valley, right? Listen to what they did. They, in U.S. banks, there's $250,000 worth of insurance for depositors. Beyond that, you're not covered. But these guys in Silicon Valley picked this bank that they had friends working there and they were right there on site and everything. And so they put all their money, they put their payroll into this bank in deposits. And there were hundreds of millions of dollars in some cases of company money in there that was completely uninsured. And apparently the guys putting the money in this bank didn't know that, didn't understand it. And apparently the guys taking those deposits didn't inform their customers that they were becoming unsecured creditors of the bank by giving them all that money. And then the thing blew up. And the US government immediately stepped in, bailed everybody out because they couldn't have Silicon Valley companies going bankrupt because their payroll money evaporated. And then here's where it gets really creepy. They sent Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, to Congress to testify about this. And a congressman said, so is everybody now insured? Are all the banks protected by this guarantee that you gave Silicon Valley Bank? And Janet Yellen said, no, we're going to take it on a case-by-case basis, which means theoretically any small bank could go bust tomorrow and the government wouldn't bail out the extra creditors that they have, the guys who had left a lot of money in those banks. And so it left the door open to all kinds of other banks failing. So it almost blew up the local and regional bank sector right there in that one conversation. And that's a signal that Janet Yellen and the other people at the Treasury Department apparently don't know how banking works. Because if you guarantee one bank, but you don't guarantee the other banks, then everybody takes their money out of the other banks because they're not guaranteed, And so they virtually destroyed the banking system just by not understanding what it was they were doing by bailing out some banks, but not others, And that's a scary sign that the people in charge. I have a series in my Substack called Morons We Should Know. Martin Armstrong is in the category of people we should know. Right. Janet Yellen got highlighted in Morons We Should Know.
But you know what? It's funny in one aspect, it's like you think, are they really stupid or are they just, are they controlled? Look at it. Look at it this way. JP Morgan Chase had no problem with what they said, right? They got billions of dollars overnight, right, of the money. Bank of America was fed, basically as they're taking all their money out of regional banks, they're putting them in Bank of America. They're putting them in their money in Wells Fargo. So I hear you, man. I don't know, but it's like you can't make sense of it.
Yeah. Okay. Two really important things there, and hopefully I can remember both when I start talking about the first one. But the first one is that I'll make a prediction that the commercial real estate market is so over leveraged and is in so much trouble that there's going to be a bust in office buildings and maybe apartment complexes, things like that. That's going to impact those local and regional banks that got into trouble already because those guys own a lot of commercial real estate paper. And when that paper goes bad, the banks will go bust. So the federal government is going to have to step in and bail those guys out at some point on a mass scale, several $1 trillion bailout of the local and regional banks. And part of that deal is going to be that JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America are going to step in and buy those assets for pennies on the dollar and make trillions of dollars of profits from it because they'll be the government's partner in the bailout of the little banks. And so we're going to end up with, there are predictions that we're going to end up with 6 banks.
Consolidation.
Yes, consolidation. They're going to destroy the little guys so the big guys can get even bigger, which is no surprise because the big guys own the government via the Fed. The big banks own the Federal Reserve.
Hey,
and they also, okay.
I just thought of something. I don't want to interrupt you though, but I was thinking, This is a great plan. Let's get a whole lot of salespeople out there to go grab all of the assets that they can and lend money on them, and then we'll just take them over. So we'll just have other people work for free for us. If you look at the U.S., we have like 4,500 banks. If you look at Russia, which is much bigger, they have 450 banks, right? So why do we have 4,500 banks? Maybe I'm off by 100 or two. Well, why do we have that? Well, maybe just what you said. There may be the great plan of let's just have them go out and all these banks start up, go get all these assets, lend money on them, and then when they collapse because the people can't refinance them or they're not worth it, then like you said, we'll just come in and take them.
Yeah,
I hope that didn't interrupt your number 2.
No, because it actually ties into my second point. Because previously you mentioned, that this must be a plan. They can't be this stupid, and you kind of just spelled out what the plan is. But it's on a much vaster scale than that. They're basically The guys in charge of the monetary printing presses are slowly destroying their currencies by creating asset bubbles with newly created currency. Those bubbles are blowing up and they're creating crises. And at the same time, they're pitting regular people against each other with, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, trans rights, that whole thing, where if the peasants understood what was happening and that we're being led to a gigantic crisis at which the guys in charge can declare martial law and take away all our constitutional rights and our assets and then turn us into basically serfs for a handful of incredibly rich, powerful people, that's coming. That's what this plan is. And if we understood that it's the aristocracy versus the working class, in other words, white and black working people and straight and gay working people, the people who are pitted against each other now, if we all saw that it's in our interest to recognize ourselves as being part of one class, that's the ultimate nightmare for the aristocracy that's in charge right now, because there's 99 of us for every one of them, and we could take over. So the key to their plan is to get us all deeply in debt so that we're at their mercy, and to keep us divided and pitted against each other with these silly social divisions that people spend all their time worrying about right now. And while we're not looking, they fleece us, bankrupt us, declare martial law, and they're in charge. And that's, okay, I'm kind of wearing my tinfoil hat here, but I think that's the only explanation for what's happening right now, because they cannot be that stupid. They have to be evil geniuses, because nobody can be as dumb as the people running California and the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve and the banking sector. They have to be doing this for a reason. And I think that's probably, some version of that is probably the reason.
You had said about the commercial real estate crashing, and you mentioned multifamily, the sector, being part of that. And there will be a lot of people that will lose a lot of money in this multifamily bust. And the ones are, I watched it happen when I saw these operators syndicating deals and raising money from people like you and me, ordinary investors, promising, not promising, but they're promising. There is no guarantee in investing, obviously, but emphasizing that the investors are getting double-digit returns on their investment. And their idea was to buy these B and C assets that were already at very low capitalization rates, meaning that they weren't delivering a lot of money. They weren't delivering the returns that they were hoping to promise the investors. And this was working for a little while. But their plan was to go into these apartments, buy these apartment buildings up, and then enhance them, make them nicer, add amenities, which cost a lot of money to do at very high inflation rates, because building materials have been at a premium, labor rates have been at a premium. At the same time that millions of millennials are moving back home with mom and dad because they couldn't afford the rent. So they were buying these assets with very little profit that the seller operators were making very little, but they were promising, look, give us your money. We're going to buy these assets and raise rents. And now we have all of these new units coming on the market by the tune of like 1 million units in the next year of multifamily buildings, brand new units that already have these rich amenities with a lot deeper pockets in many cases, to where they can give 15-month leases for 12-month rates. And people that can afford $2,500 a month for an apartment, and depending on where you are, that may be low. It may be $7,000 a month if you're in New York City. But my point is, if you have the choice to move into this old, outdated apartment or this brand new apartment complex, you're going to go for the new apartments. So these operators are in really bad shape. A lot of these, they refinanced them. They bought them. They used the investors' money. They stuck that in their pockets. They refinanced the property to the hilt and then used that money to start another deal. And now these loans are coming due, and these operators are having like capital calls with the people that have already given them all their money, saying we need more money, or we're going to give these apartment buildings up for 30 cents on the dollar. And that's what's happening. And we're going to see a lot more of that. At the same time that on whitehouse.gov, you could see the Biden administration's plan to try and incentivize businesses to gobble up or take it pennies probably on the dollar, these office buildings, and convert them into apartments. I have no idea how we're doing all this. Here, Joe's pulled it up here. The fact sheet talks about how they're planning on doing it. This is a day late and a dollar short, in my opinion. I mean, which always seems to be the case. I'm not picking on this administration. I'm just saying by the time, the government looks at such backward-looking data, they probably didn't realize that there was already going to be a glut on multifamily housing. They probably were looking at the same thing that Jay Powell's looking at and company when they're going off of this, trying to run our country on backward-looking data, lagging effects, things like that. But we're going to get, this is really going to be bad. This is going to be really nasty, this commercial banking, real estate crisis, which is going to overflow into these regional banks. I don't know how, I guess they're just going to bail them out like the student loan program.
Well, what will probably happen is that a lot of these office buildings will change hands at a big loss. And that loss has to be reported by the people who are on the hook for it. And a lot of local and regional banks will be on the hook. So they're going to have to report those losses, which will spook their creditors, their depositors, which will force them to sell more assets at bigger losses to pay off the depositors that are leaving. Until the bank just collapses. And then, spread that across the whole economy, because there's office building paper in every local and regional bank, just about. So
70%.
Yeah. So when it happens, and it might be this year, because a lot of buildings are being sold at a loss now. And if that spreads, then boom, that's the story of the second half of 2024. I'm not predicting that's when it happens yet, but it could be. It could be something that happens sooner rather than later.
Here's what's happening, though. And I find this to be very interesting. These banks, a lot of them aren't foreclosing on these assets. What they're doing, and I know this firsthand, is what they're doing is they're saying, your loan matures next month, but we'll give you a 120-day extension to figure it out. So what they're essentially doing is saying, hey, look, send us in, we're going to get some kind of an extension paperwork. You're still bound to make the payments, but we're not going to accelerate this loan right now until we figure out how we're going to deal with it. Because in a lot of cases, John, the money doesn't work anymore. If you had to underwrite that building the same way that you did your underwriting 5 years ago, their vacancy rates are killing them because they don't have the income, and the building isn't worth what it was 5 years ago in the eyes of the banks. They're saying, man, we're really out there. If you owe us $40 million on this building, $25 million on this building, we may only be comfortable refinancing for 60% of that. And we want the rest in cash. And these operators don't have it. So that's where, that's coming. When I can drive down, we're close to York Road. It's a major road. It's called York Road, close to our office here. And I can tell you, I was doing this, I'm doing it everywhere I go now. I'm all over the place with seeing clients. but I'm now starting to really take inventory of vacancy. Oh man, it's bad. I mean, bad. It's in the shopping center industry. There's a term called going dark, and that's essentially what it is. Your lights are going out. You get this business is out, this business is out, this business is out. Next thing you know, they're falling like dominoes. And that's really not good for the remaining businesses that are in there, because you're relying on, when you look at a convenience center or strip center and you have different stores, you're relying on one tenant to bring business to multiple tenants, right? You're trying to assemble a group of stores that complement each other, that somebody pulls into the parking lot and they can go from here to here to here, and spread their money. Well, when you start to take that away, that really decays the remaining stores. So we're seeing that. I mean, it's really bad, really bad. We're seeing brand new strip centers empty, lease signs for over a year.
Well, so many of the anchor stores are going out of business for the malls, right? JCPenney and Macy's and Sears. And you take those guys out of the equation for a mall, and it's almost dying right there, because half the people who went to the mall went to that store. So, yeah, we'll have to figure out other uses for malls, because e-commerce is making them obsolete in their original purpose. So maybe, illegal immigrant housing or something like that, or
bulldozer.
Car showrooms, that could be like the auto super center, a mall where you've got different dealers there in the same building. I don't know. And, it's possible that there ends up being nothing you can do with all these malls, and they are just bulldozed, like you said. So
these car dealers have all the money. I tell you what, I have never seen operators in business tear their buildings down and rebuild them ever so many. I mean, they depreciate these buildings and then they just renovate them. So it amazes me. I don't know, man. You know what? I think we're going to see the comeback of the used car.
Well, yeah, that's an inflation thing, because cars got so expensive that millennials and Zoomers, Gen Zers, can't afford a new car now. So you got to go with something that's like 8 years old. And that's the best you can do. If you're a 30-year-old making $40,000 a year, you aren't going to buy a new car.
Guys, if you're just logging on, John Rubino, he's our guest here tonight. He has a Substack. It's in the show notes. His information, strongly suggest that you subscribe to his Substack. He's great, if you haven't already realized that. But anyway, Melissa, the silence over here is really...
You're really chatty tonight. Lots to say.
Lots to say.
Lots to say.
It's that Red Bull.
Oh, I know. I'm well aware of the Red Bull. But I'd like to address...
I wonder why I can't sleep at night.
Yeah.
I'm up late at night.
Yeah. Can we look at the poll, Joe? Do you mind pulling that up? So the poll, we've got 964 votes. Please vote if you have not had an opportunity yet. What concerns you the most? War in the Middle East?
Where's the poll?
He's bringing it up.
Oh.
I'm just going to recap while he's bringing it up. War in the Middle East is at 6%. World War III, 8%. U.S. economic depression, 32%. And all of the above is at 55%.
John, what do you think about that, man? What worries you the most?
Well, I've got 2 draft age sons, so this is super personal for me. I'm terrified of them, being incinerated in a nuclear war because some idiot wants to take over Russia's natural resources or something like that. So that's my big issue, and I think it should be a big issue for virtually everybody, because it's more possible than we're being told that it is. So, pay attention to geopolitics. This is one of those times when it deeply matters. But all the other stuff is important too. I mean, assuming we avoid World War III, then what happens in the U.S. economy is going to be front page news and front burner for most people, because it's going to affect our ability to live. If you're trying to raise kids in this world right now, you deeply care about you being able to keep your job and get a good raise going forward, and to be able to afford day-to-day life. And none of that is guaranteed in the world that's coming. So people that are worried about the economy absolutely should be worried, because debt works the same way for a country as it does for an individual or a family. You borrow too much money and your life becomes chaotic. That's what the whole world has done now. So it's going to be a mess from pretty much any angle that you analyze it going forward. And all we can do as individuals is try to figure out how to arrange our lives so we're resilient. So whatever this crazy economy throws at us, we've got the tools to deal with it. Roll with the punches and then come out of it stronger than we went in. And that's the real intellectual challenge, I think.
What do you think World War III would really look like?
Well, you know that saying, we'll fight World War III with nuclear weapons, and we'll fight World War IV with sticks and rocks and things. So I think it would be inconceivable, World War III, because part of it is because we're developing all these weapons that have never been used. We've got autonomous nuclear-powered submarines with nuclear missiles, and they're being run by AIs right now, patrolling the ocean. And we've got those robot dogs in the science fiction movies now. They're actually a real thing. You can take these four-legged robots, strap 50 caliber machine guns on them, hook them up with an AI to control them, and send them out. And the AI picks the targets, and the machine gun kills them. And and then hypersonic missiles. We've got missiles that can reach a target on another continent in 15 minutes. So there's no way to defend against them. You launch those things, your target is destroyed, and that's all there is to it. And apparently, China has the ability to drop nuclear weapons from space on different parts of the earth. So there's no way to say,
or from weather balloons.
Yeah. But so there's no way to look at that kind of weaponry and say, well, here's how World War III will go, because you can't know. Oh, and then don't forget cyber war. We could conceivably shut down the power grid of another country, leave them freezing to death or starving to death in the winter. And that's the war. It just happens because we flip a switch over here, they starve in the next 3 months, and that's all there is to it. So,
or they flip a switch over there.
Yeah, and that happens to us here. Yes, the EMP attack scenario, which is in a lot of science fiction books, post-apocalyptic science fiction books, where they detonate a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere that fries all of our electronics, and we're right back in 1850. But with 10 times as many people as can be supported with 1850 technology. So that's all possible. So the solution is don't get into that kind of a fight. We just need to avoid this, because there's no way to guarantee a good outcome for anybody in a situation like this.
Yeah.
We have a super chat here. Who keeps funding all of this bad credit? Are they stupid? Do they have some gain? Is it nefarious?
Well, as we were talking about before, that's a big question, because there's evidence for stupidity out there. Anytime you hear somebody from the Fed talk or something like that, it's clear they don't really understand how monetary policy or the broader economy works. But the mistakes that they're making are so continuously on the side of chaos. Whether it's the people running a lot of states here and making shoplifting illegal and camping on the streets legal, or the people running monetary policy, where they create so much new currency that inflation spikes, and that's debilitating for half of the economy. And they knew that was going to happen when they created 30% more money and dumped it into the system. So I think I'm coming down now on the side of it's a plan. It's a very scary plan to create a world of debt serfs, people that owe so much money that they're dependent on the government for their survival, and they have to do what they're told. And at that point, you get the World Economic Forum Great Reset kind of thing, where our betters, the aristocrats who actually have resources still after all the chaos, step in and they reconfigure the world in a way that favors them. And that probably means, a lot fewer people, because they don't need 6 billion or 7 billion people when most of the tech that supports their lifestyles is run by AI. So, it's a very scary scenario, and one that I didn't start out believing, but as the mistakes keep being made and pointing in the same direction, I'm coming around to the idea that that's what they would like to see. We just have to figure out that that's the situation and then take the necessary steps. So it doesn't sound like people are doing that yet, though. There aren't a lot of signs that they are doing it, other than populist politicians gaining a lot of traction around the world. Argentina, Italy, the US to an extent with Trump, in several other places. The voters have elected guys who sound like just ideological bomb throwers. They want to tear the system out by the roots because, the populism sales pitch politically is that a handful of rich criminals are basically stealing from the rest of us. And I, as your new president, will step in and I'll get back what is yours from the guys who are robbing you. And there are variations on that sales pitch that are selling in different places. Germany and France could totally be ruled by parties with that kind of a philosophy pretty soon. The US could easily be, again, we could re-elect Trump and he could have learned his lesson and he could put a bunch of populists in charge of the administrative state and they might tear it out by the roots. Who knows? These things are conceivable. And that would be the solution if we just accept the idea that there's a small group of people, you can call them an aristocracy or an oligopoly or any number of other names, but that those guys are basically harvesting the rest of us. And that we need to get together, put our differences aside, and set that big thing right. So, sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but I think that that's the best case scenario. It's not a likely scenario, but it's still possible at this point.
We got another comment here: distract, divide, and conquer.
There you go. That's exactly it. That's what we're being subjected to right now, and I got to say it's partially working. So hopefully we learn more as time goes on, and we still have a chance to set things right when a critical mass of people figure this out.
Have you ever been on the World Economic Forum's website?
They put the truth. They say the quiet part out loud there, don't they? They tell you exactly what they intend.
Man, I tell you what, but the biggest shock for me were their supporters. If you go to their supporter, you're talking about every major corporation in America. I mean, it's there is. They have them all listed there, alphabetical order. Down to companies like Adobe. You name it. They have so many partners, and there you go. Joe's showing it to you right now. So,
this is not a secret. It's it's like they're so sure of themselves that they're able to communicate with each other in person publicly and say what they intend to do. And that's terrifying, but maybe they're overplaying their hand because a handful of people heading for a critical mass of people might see this stuff and come to the right conclusion, which these guys cannot be trusted, and we need to take their power away from them.
Well, you talk about globalization and, us being one people, the human race, and we are all very interconnected. When you're calling various companies, you're calling other countries that are, representing companies. And so, obviously, I understand globalization and the benefits of it, but there are also a lot of problems with it. And I see the biggest problem that we have here in the U.S. is we don't make anything. What do we do? We don't make anything. We're trying to get these, chip manufacturing facilities built here. I mean, it's taken forever to do that. It takes forever to build anything here in the U.S., but we really don't make anything. What do we make?
Yeah. Globalization was an idea based on the premise of something called comparative advantage, which is an economic term for organizing a system where everybody does the thing they're best at. And so everything gets done by somebody who's really good at the thing they're doing. And so they spread supply chains out all around the world. They moved things that used to be made in the US, they moved their supply chains to 10 different countries, culminating in China, making the thing finally, and shipping it back to us. And, this is another one of those things where did they just make a stupid mistake, or was this part of a plan? Because the effect of globalization was to basically eliminate a big chunk of the middle class in the US, because it used to be that you could work in a GM assembly plant in Dearborn, Michigan, and make middle class money. And that all went away when we shipped all our factory work to China or to Mexico or to Vietnam or to Indonesia or any number of other places. And those guys who used to be assembly line workers and other kinds of people who worked with their hands and made real things, they lost their livelihoods and they lost their lives, because before they were, they could afford a house and they could afford for the spouse to stay home and take care of the kids. And so the kids got raised by an actual parent. And there was always food on the table, and the neighborhood was reasonably safe, and the schools were reasonably good because of the money that flowed from that manufacturing job. Take all that away, and we took a whole category of Americans, basically high school educated men, and we told them they were no longer needed. So all they could get was, stocking shelves at Walmart or something like that. And then their kids didn't respect them anymore, and their wives left them, and spread this across the country. And that's what happened to that whole generation of people. A big part of Donald Trump's presidency is the fact that he spoke that language. He went to those guys and said, you know what, the system screwed you over, and I'm going to get it back for you. And so he basically owned the high school educated white male vote because of that. The guys who used to be middle class, by destroying that group of people's livelihoods, we also made them controllable, because now they have a crappy job, they can barely afford life, they're dependent on the government. So they're not the people they used to be, and they're not the political force, and they're not the ungovernable category of people that they used to be. And that looks like it serves the plan that we talked about before, right? You take that whole category of people who would be kind of hard to control in any event, and you break them. And so that's what globalization did. And over the past decade or so, people have figured out that globalization is very bad for them. And so we're rolling it back now. The US is trying to bring back jobs from other countries, and we're going to start making stuff here again. And that's a really good thing, anti-globalization. So they call it friendshoring or reshoring. In other words, bringing stuff back to either your own country or countries that you trust. Like in the U.S. case, we're bringing things back here, but we're also bringing back factories to Mexico that used to be in China. And that's incredibly healthy. But it's also very inflationary. There's going to be a lot of factory jobs going forward. They're going to be unionized. They're going to pay well. But that kind of wage inflation is going to push the price of a lot of things up. So it's not going to be an easy transition, but it's a very good transition for the things we're talking about, for the middle class to start expanding again and to want stability and not want to be controlled. That's a good thing. That's probably bad news for the World Economic Forum and the other globalists. But to the extent that it continues, then it gives us a chance of coming out of this in good shape and not being debt slaves across the board.
Well, maybe we'll have products that we could actually buy once and have it for 20 or 25 years instead of buying a product and throwing it in the garbage can in a month and a half.
Well, Okay, kind of something that's tangential from what we're talking about is the idea that we should become more competent. For several generations now, we've basically, we've become college-educated knowledge workers who really don't know how to fix anything physical. So we buy a cell phone.
We become lazy.
Yeah, we toss that cell phone away and get a new, and what we should really be doing going forward is becoming competent again, learning how to make things. There was a South Park episode where one of the storylines was that, okay, South Park was basically populated by college educated people who couldn't fix anything. So they had to hire their handymen, but there was more work than the handyman could cover. So the handymen started raising their prices, and they became the elites of that society because the college educated guys desperately needed them to keep their lives working, And I think that's in part kind of the world that is headed our way, where people who work with physical things, the plumbers, the electricians, the handymen, actually have good paying jobs. And the knowledge workers are all replaced by AI. So there's going to be this big flip in societal position, going forward, where if you're competent, you're actually somebody who's valued by society instead of looked down on. And I like that idea.
I tell you what, though, that's going to be a slow process because what I see, look, when I was in high school, I took drafting, I took metal shop, I took wood shop, we actually taught kids how to make things, how to build things. And now, and I hate to say it, but even the ones that are working construction, it's amazing. That's why one of the reasons why we're paying so much for things. I was on a job a couple days ago, and there were electricians working on this job, and they had to dig a ditch. Man, I got to tell you, it was comical in one aspect, and it was completely disheartening in another, because these three, I'm going to say 20-something year olds in apprenticeship, to journeymen, whatever, to get, as you become electricians. Man, it was painful watching them dig. It was, they didn't know how to dig. And, and I was talking with the one, and all he kept saying was he was the low man on the totem pole, and he can't wait until all he can do is electrical work. I'm like, man, sometimes you have to dig a ditch. Come on. But trying to get our kids to dig ditches now is not going to be an easy thing to do in in light of like Instagram and TikTok and, all these things that are robbing their attention. And they don't want to dig ditches.
Yeah, but Todd, that's actually really a hopeful story that you just told, because that kid, it sounds like, is motivated to become an electrician. And that's a really good thing. Okay, we'll find people to dig the ditches if we just have enough electricians later.
Right. That's it.
Because, a lot of his peers are motivated to be game designers or YouTube personalities or something like that. TikTok.
YouTube personalities.
Yeah, sorry. No, you see,
I dug my ditches, man. Come on. Yeah. I spent years digging ditches.
You are a major YouTube personality. There's a difference.
I earned this YouTube right, man.
Yeah.
I didn't want to become an electrician. I wanted to become a YouTuber.
Well, let's see. I think if you ask a lot of kids right now, they would probably put being a TikTok influencer at the top of their aspirational ladder. And so those are the kids who have to go back and become electricians at some point for us to have a healthy society. And you're right, that's not going to be an easy transition at all, is it?
Yeah, not really.
I do have some more super chats here. These corporate jobs reverse to engineer the quiet quitting, basically telling folks you don't come back. You basically fired with no benefits.
There's a lot of interesting workforce stuff going on out there. And there is quiet quitting, and then quiet firing, and lots of things like that. And part of that comes from everybody being overconfident. Because if you're quiet quitting, for instance, that means you're pretty sure you're going to keep that job, right? And you're pretty sure you can get a new one if you lose that job, or else you wouldn't be messing around with your boss like that. And if you quiet fire people, that means you're very secure in the workforce that you've got. And I think over the next few years, people are going to lose that security. And we're going to see, and this is going to be one of the upsides of hard times, is companies starting to appreciate their workers again, and workers starting to appreciate a good job again. And, back in the 1950s, which is kind of what we're headed back to if we're really, really lucky, that kind of a societal attitude where we know that bad times are possible. So we take what we have seriously and we protect it. So I think that a lot of the trouble that we have now and a lot of the really societal dysfunction that we have now will be cured by all of a sudden people not knowing where their next meal is coming from, or when they're ever going to work again, or when they're ever going to be able to fully staff up. Stuff like that is going to be possible in the future, and it's going to be horrible, but it's going to have a good side effect, which is that people are going to get a lot more realistic and a lot more appreciative of the things that they have. And they're going to be a lot more ambitious across the board because of that, because they don't just want what they have anymore. They want to keep it and improve it instead of just blow it off as soon as they're uncomfortable.
John, a little off topic, but what do you think is going to happen to a lot of the, people that are relying on Social Security and Medicare and, their pensions and things like that? What do you think is going to happen with, Generation Xers or, the baby boomers that are living longer?
I think a lot of people who think they have things will find out they don't have them. Like pensions are just going to be a brutal story because especially, for instance, public sector pensions in a lot of older cities, there are tens of thousands of teachers and firefighters and cops who, did their job, did it well, played by the rules, worked hard, and then they got these really nice public sector pensions. But the governments of those states and cities didn't fund those pensions fully. So there isn't enough money there now to cover their obligations. And that's with stocks and bonds being pretty well valued. Their portfolio of investment assets are okay right now. But in the equities and bond market crashes that are probably going to come when things really get bad, those pension funds are going to go from underfunded to catastrophically underfunded, and people are going to just not get what they were promised. And so that's going to be a big story going forward, because it's going to be horrifying for a lot of these guys who thought they were going to get, $2,500 a month for life plus healthcare, and it turns out they're going to get $1,200 a month plus no healthcare or something like that, which is the way these pension funds are going to go. So that's going to be a big story, and it's going to be a source of incredible unrest when it happens, because these public sector unions are really powerful, and they're not going to let this happen without a big fight. So our cities are going to be inflamed by the pension issue at some point in the future.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right about that.
We do have some more. This one here from Charles. Charles, thank you so much for your super chat. Christina Smallhorn, you should have her on. Housing YouTuber has a theory that
She turned me down.
BlackRock.
She did.
I know she did. She
Turn me down.
But she has a theory that BlackRock may be using squatters to pick up homes for cheap.
She's a better dancer than me. She always dances on her shows. I would love to have Christina on, but she declined.
Well, maybe she'll rethink that.
She's not allowed on now.
No,
I mean,
no second
if you
chances.
turn us down, I've asked like twice.
Okay.
Not begging.
No, we don't beg here. That's not going on. Then we have another comment here. It's crazy American patriots haven't repudiated this tyrannical nonsense. They are dividing us with social justice victim narratives.
Yeah, that seems to be the strategy, and it is really working, because I think if you look at what people spend most of their time arguing about, it's these issues that don't really matter to how much you have to eat the next day, or whether you're free to exercise your constitutional rights. We don't walk around thinking about that stuff. We walk around thinking about, what the last video that we saw, where people were arguing with each other over some social issue, and who's right and who's wrong about that. And that's exactly the way the guys in charge want it. So hopefully, shows like this wake enough people up that it really starts to change, and it is really starting to change. You're seeing it in politics. So watch how the populist political candidates do, and that'll be a good gauge of how many people are starting to wake up and see what the real strategy of the aristocracy is.
Do have some more questions here. Bear with me one moment. Just need to scroll up here. So the question is, with crude, dollar, and decoupling the dollar from gold, how much of the 70s economic nightmare was based on those two?
A part of it was, because basically what we did was we took gold off of the gold, or we took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971. But we did that because we were trying to fund simultaneously the Vietnam War and the advent of the Great Society social programs. So we put those two things together, and it was incredibly expensive. We were having to borrow more money and create more currency, and that spooked the dollar holders in the world, and they started demanding gold for their dollars, and that's what caused us to go off the gold standard. And the expense of the Great Society programs and the Vietnam War led to the inflation of the 1970s, and that was a really tumultuous decade. And it was our only real currency crisis that we had, where we were actually worried about the dollar dying, because inflation was spiking, and there was turmoil around the world, and prices were. So it was one of those times when we lost our self-confidence, and a big part of that loss of self-confidence was part and parcel to the monetary system at the time. So that's why the 1970s is a really good template for what's coming. It's much, much worse now than it was back then, but a lot of the mistakes we made back then are being made again, just on a much bigger scale. So a lot of what happened back then could be what happens in our future, only on a much bigger scale. So it's a good learning experience to study the 1970s.
We also shipped 4 million manufacturing jobs offshore in the 1970s too.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's when globalization began.
Yeah.
And it really ramped up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. But yeah, because that was back when we made most of the cars in the world. And then Japan came in with Datsun B210s and little Nissans otherwise, and Honda Civics and things like that, which didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but ended up decimating the US car industry. So yeah, a lot of those jobs were shipped to Japan inadvertently. We didn't realize it was happening. We didn't understand the process, but that's how it happened, and that's how it began. And then globalization was off and running.
It seemed like everything was stamped made in the USA back then. I mean, I know it wasn't, not everything was made in the USA, but it's so weird to see it now. You'll see, a manufacturing company, a local manufacturing company, and they'll advertise, 100% made in the USA, and it's like, it's weird.
Yeah, we kind of
from China.
Well, it's like we committed industrial suicide. We thought it wasn't important to actually make stuff, and it turned out it was incredibly important to make stuff. So yeah, and now you're going to see made in the USA on more things, because we're making more stuff, and because it's a selling point. People understand that we hurt ourselves by shipping manufacturing to China, and that we're helping ourselves by bringing it back. So, I think there was a long stretch there when made in the USA was actually a negative for something, because you would have thought, oh, I can get the Chinese made version cheaper or something like that. And now you see it and think, okay, this is high quality because it's made right here by people I know. And this is a good trend. There are good trends. I'm saying a lot of gloom and doomy things, but there are positive trends out there. And the idea that we're bringing back manufacturing to the US is one of the really good trends that are happening.
Another question here for you.
I want to get then into, this is what a death spiral looks like. This is John's. Look, if you guys are just logging on, John Rubino here. We're talking about some of his work on his Substack, which is in the show notes. You'll have to cruise on over and subscribe to his Substack.
I'll ask this question really quick.
Yeah.
Is that good? Okay, cool. How does Wall Street roll in profits with inflation and interest rates rising while people are spending less?
Wall Street doesn't so much care about what people spend. They care about asset prices, and they care about deals getting done. So as long as stocks, bonds, and real estate are getting more valuable, Wall Street finds ways to make money from that. Now, the reverse is true. When we have a massive equities bear market or bond prices just collapse or something like that, Wall Street loses a lot of money because they own a lot of those assets, and their favorite customers own a lot of those assets. So one of the nice things about a financial crisis is that it hits the guys who've been making money all along off of the backs of regular people. And you see the rich get much less rich, and Wall Street, a lot of jobs on Wall Street go away, and the money that's being made by the guys who run Wall Street goes way down. So that's one of the upsides of the coming financial crisis. But in the meantime, they're still making lots of money. They're rolling up the housing industry, and they're looking around for other things they can buy up, like doctors' offices and farmland. They're still making lots of money by converting a lot of the necessities of life into tradable assets that they can speculate on and make fortunes by manipulating markets. So Wall Street is still there. It's still making tons of money. It's still basically running the show in Washington. But in the next big crisis, it will suffer disproportionately because the crisis will be in assets that they own. So they'll lose a ton of money.
Joe, let's pull up this Fred chart on government interest expense. And this was in one of your write-ups, John, referring to this is what a death spiral looks like. And you begin referring to the U.S. government's rising interest expense. And I just would like for you to explain to our audience what is going on in this chart.
Okay, government interest expense. Here, let me see it. Okay, there we go. Okay, basically, the government's been borrowing money year after year since the 1980s. Really is when it got going. Under Ronald Reagan, we ran big deficits, and we found out that there was no political cost to running deficits. So the government's been borrowing money ever since.
So who have they been borrowing from?
Well, they basically create treasury bonds, and they hand those treasury bonds to banks. And then the banks hand those treasury bonds to their big customers. So, for instance, bond funds will buy treasury bonds, or foreign central banks that want dollar-denominated assets as their reserve assets will buy treasury bonds. And then just rich guys, they put part of their money in super safe government bonds. So there's always a demand for U.S. government paper out there because there's always a demand for dollars. But in the 1980s and 1990s, we ended up with a lot of extra debt. And then in the 2000s, it looked like that debt was going to cost us a lot of money because we got to pay interest on it, right? So part of the the financial strategy of the US government was to respond to every crisis then and in the future with easier money. They would push interest rates down to a lower level. And that helps bail out the big banks that are in trouble. But it also makes the government's interest costs lower. So governments could borrow money without having to pay a lot of interest, which means that their budget was closer to being in balance. And so they did that for going on 20 years. They just pushed interest rates down. And then there was a crisis and they pushed interest rates down even further until we got down to pretty much zero. So that for the US, interest rates were low enough that the government could borrow money and not really see its interest costs go up. And in Japan, they pushed interest rates down into negative territory. So get this, the government could borrow money and its deficit went down because the bonds that the government was issuing actually paid the government instead of the other way around. You know, the bond had a negative 0.5 interest rate. And so the government would get positive cash flow by issuing more bonds. Now that worked beautifully for about 10 or 15 years until inflation started to hit. You know, all the debt that the governments of the world were taking on and all the currency they were creating that went along with the debt caused inflation to spike. And that was 2022. That's when inflation went up to almost double-digit levels in the US. And then we had to respond to that with higher interest rates. So what we found then was that, okay, we've taken on all this debt over the last 40 years, didn't hurt us a bit, but now that interest rates are going up, it's suddenly starting to hurt us. We're suddenly having to pay interest on that debt, and the numbers are breathtaking. Like the US went from having interest on its debt of around $300 or $400 billion a year to $1 trillion a year in no time flat. The chart, as you can see, went almost straight up. And this year, the US is going to issue $10 trillion worth of government paper. Some of it's rollover of existing debt, some of it's new debt. And it has to pay interest on that now too. So the interest cost of the US government will be like $1.6 trillion a year in 2025, and there's no end in sight. So we're looking at a potential government bankruptcy unless we fix this, but they have no idea how to fix it.
I mean, looking at this chart, I mean, this is crazy. You can see, I mean, like you said, this line goes straight up. It's higher than they've been tracking ever since they've been tracking it, dating back before the 1950s and the 1940s. I kind of wonder, like, where does it go from here?
Well, that's the question, because it doesn't go anywhere good, because there's nowhere for that chart to go that's good. Because, for instance, the government could lower its interest costs by pushing interest rates back down into negative territory. And then its interest costs would go down because its new debt would be actually paying the government. But that would cause massive inflation. So you'd see, 2022 on steroids, and maybe inflation would go up 10% or 15 or 20%. And then everything would go crazy, because nobody wants to lend money if they're going to be paid back in currency that's depreciating at an accelerating rate. So the bond markets will just totally flake out if inflation spikes again. So the government can't do that because they'll crash the financial markets. But if they keep on having to pay more and more interest, they're in a death spiral where their interest costs go up and that money has to be borrowed. And then they have to pay interest on that new borrowing and so on into infinity, basically. So you get a death spiral. And either way, the system breaks down. And those are our only two choices. We have no other choices right now until we do a currency reset. So the big crisis that's coming, the next stage of the process after that is some kind of a currency reset where we go to a new kind of monetary system. And we just screw over everybody who trusted the government. Their old dollars become way less valuable. And we institute some kind of a new currency. It might be a gold standard. That would be the most logical thing to do, is just announce that henceforth the dollar is just a name for 1/10,000th of an ounce of gold. And then going forward, gold is exchangeable at U.S. government offices with dollars. You can go in and buy gold, or you can go in and sell gold for dollars. And that controls the money supply. It links it to the supply of gold. So going forward, zero inflation, nice, smooth economy. But to get there, you have to impoverish all the people who kept big dollar bank accounts and things, because you got to devalue the dollar to get there. And that's the next big hurdle. How do you do that without causing a revolution? And history says there is no easy answer.
Yeah, well, I think we're realizing that. Where do you think the bond rates will go? I mean, if they obviously need more money to pay the interest on their debt, and I've heard a lot of people say that pretty soon, maybe by 2030, 2050, that the debt, the interest to satisfy the debt will exceed what they collect in tax revenues. But they're obviously going to need to entice more investors into bonds. Where do you think the bond market will go?
Well, see, the bonds depend for their value on the currency that they pay you in interest, right? So bonds will go in the same direction as the dollar. If the dollar loses value, then bonds are worthless. So you'll see bonds go down. And when bonds go down, the interest rate on those bonds goes up. It's a reciprocal relationship. So interest rates will spike in a way that's out of the control of the government. The government will try to force interest rates down, but find out it can't do it. And so you get something that's like what I was talking about in the 1970s. The dollar fell in value, inflation went up, and interest rates went way up. And that's one scenario for what we might see this time around, and we've got historical precedent for that. It already happened once, and we're making those same mistakes, so maybe the same problems will happen again. But the old saying that each crisis, or history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. So it might be similar, but it won't be identical. And there are lots of other problems, or lots of other ways this could go. And some of them could include geopolitical crises, where we were in World War III, and then what happens to the financial system, and who knows, or we have that gigantic cyber attack or something like that. We don't even know where it comes from, and what does that do to the bond market? These are unknowable things. But you counter that risk by getting out of the bond market. Just don't own things like that. So personally, you can protect yourself by owning gold and silver and farmland and really good rental houses, things like that governments can't inflate away, and that protects you. But the guys who just own bank stocks and bonds and bank accounts are the ones who will really be hurt by a monetary reset.
You talk about how a country goes bankrupt. Do you think that's really possible? That the U.S. could go bankrupt?
Well, see, the U.S. is kind of a special case because everybody wants dollars. There's so much dollar-denominated debt out there that everybody has to get dollars, which means dollars kind of hold up relative to other currencies on the international exchanges. And that prevents us from just spiraling down to zero like other countries do. Because, Google lists of hyperinflations. And you'll find a whole page of countries whose names you recognize who had hyperinflations where they screwed up their currency. The currency went to zero, and then they had to do a reset. And that's basically national bankruptcy when that happens. So yeah, it's completely possible that a country can go bankrupt by creating too much currency and having everybody lose faith in the value of that currency. Now that's more of that's a Japan thing. Japan could do that. And Europe could do that. The U.S. would be the last to do that, just because there's so many people out there with dollar-denominated debt where they got to get dollars in order to pay the debt. But once this starts going, I don't know if we can differentiate between which country goes first and second, and which domino knocks down which other domino, because it'll be too chaotic for that. Too many decisions will be made under pressure that change the course of this.
Reading your paper here on your Substack, you have the 10 steps, and you're referring to Japan, But it definitely, I mean, it's the same what we're experiencing here. Step one is build up massive debt. Step two is lower interest rates to minimize interest expense, right? So we've been there. We've lowered the interest rate to just about zero. Step three, continue to borrow at virtually no cost. Step four, experience sudden sharp inflation. Experience a plunging currency. Step five. Step six, reluctantly allow interest rates to rise. Step seven, get swamped by interest expense, which is what we're seeing, that sharp line, right? Step eight, desperately try to lower rates, right? It'd be too late at that point. Step nine, basically watch it implode. And step 10 is game over. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you see, because other countries are making or have made the same mistakes.
Yeah, and that all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? And, Japan is a little further ahead of us now because they're at the point where their currency is tanking. It's now like 155 yen to the dollar, and not so long ago it was 100. So they've lost like 50% of their value versus the dollar now, and they don't know how to stop that decline in Japan, because normally to stop a decline in currency, you raise interest rates to make bonds denominated in your currency more attractive. But if Japan does that, then their interest cost spikes out of control, and that bankrupts them. So that's where they are right now. Their currency is tanking. They cannot raise interest rates to fix it. And so that's it. Their currency is in very real danger now of just ceasing to function as a currency. So, and Japan's the third biggest economy in the world. It's not some little banana republic. It's a major entity in the global financial system. So this is a very big deal, and that's a stat to watch. Look at the yen versus the dollar, and watch where it goes from now on.
Some final questions here as we wind up tonight.
Sure do. Another super chat. U.S. government allows market theft and manipulation. Exceptions to rules. Look up failures to delivers and reap hypothecation of shares. Little transparency. Yes,
that's part of the scam that's being run, is that all kinds of things are being borrowed against more than once. In other words, rehypothecations means use something for collateral for one loan and use it for another loan. And so you end up with, when some of those loans start going bad, you find out they're not actually collateralized after all. And then the system breaks down. So that is one way this could go. And that, it could be kind of what we've got going with commercial real estate, where a lot more people think they have a stake in this thing than they do.
I got to say something very interesting here, because as we've been talking, and it's amazing, you hear about, and I know a couple of our videos we've been suppressed. We did a video about the power grid going down, and that was suppressed. But it's amazing to watch here tonight, where we had 2,000 viewers at one time, and now we're showing like 64.
And there's something, because on YouTube,
something either is going on with YouTube right now, or we're being majorly suppressed because of our content.
It's one of the two,
which could be. It's very interesting.
It is. I know. I noticed the same thing.
Look, you go from 2,000 viewers to 70 viewers. That's something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry if I screwed things up for you.
No, man. Because
a lot of this stuff is the kind of thing. But this is what gets censored. A lot of what we're talking about.
Exactly. Which is really interesting, because we founded the United States was founded to get away from the kings, right? The rulers. We were founded so that we would have freedom of speech, right? And so we now, with all of the overreach, it's something, because the transparency, we don't have transparency. Things are censored, and which isn't right. We should be entitled. Why wouldn't they tell us what's going on. Why wouldn't they give people freedom of speech without censorship? But they don't. And, so it's up to you guys that are watching the video to actually share this video and get it out to more people, because that's the only way that we can make it happen a lot of times, right? If we want to talk about just, how everything is great, and cruising right along, and our economy's great, and the job market numbers are right, and the unemployment reporting is accurate, and everything is just fine and dandy, and you guys really have more money than you really think that you do in your bank account, even though it says almost negative, and you don't have enough to pay your bills, or you have to pick and choose what bill that you actually pay this month. Do I feed my family, or put fuel in my car so I can get back and forth to work, or do I decide to do pay my credit card bill? So it is amazing, but guys, this really just kind of fuels me to say, share this video, get it out there, what John is talking about. Where else do you go to hear these kind of things, right? You're not getting this from even Fox. I hate to say it. It's, anyway. What are you laughing
So I
at?
just refreshed the YouTube page, and now it only says 49 are watching.
49 are watching, right? It's amazing. We've never had this before. In 3 years, we've never seen 45 viewers watching at a time. So it's amazing. So anyway, you see this. Rubino is a good egg. We can just go through this. Truth is strength. Yeah. What did that say? My connection to your live stream keeps getting shut down. Oh man,
Wow.
There's the problem. Yeah.
This is great. This is great.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. They're just stopping us, John. They're just shutting it down.
Yeah. Well, we really didn't talk much about censorship here, but that is a big part of the plan, is to make sure people don't hear the whole, it's a class thing, not a race thing or a gender thing. And I obviously YouTube is part of that process. So, you guys ought to consider a presence on Rumble. So far, so good. That seems to be uncensored.
Yeah, actually, what did it say? Oh, I could not open a link. I signed off, clean, went to Google. Yeah, look, I know we've been talking about it, and in fact, I think that's probably a good option. But anyway, John, man, we love you, brother. We thank you so much for coming on and sharing what you know. John's information is in the show notes. Visit his Substack. Subscribe to him. He doesn't just, it's not just spam. He's not spamming you. I get these emails with his new work. And yeah, we love to have him on. We're getting ready to record a show with him later on this week that will probably air next Saturday. So please stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you're one of the 74 that are watching right now, please, you're probably already subscribed, but again, share us with your friends. It's interesting to see this censorship taking place as we are rolling out this video. But John, thanks so much, man, for joining us.
Oh, thanks. I really enjoyed it. Once again, you guys are excellent interviewers. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And guys, Melissa?
Yeah,
any
thank you,
final
John.
thoughts?
Very grateful. And we'll have you back anytime, even if the numbers are
We don't. Right.
5 people. We're
They'll
going to
find us.
have you back. They'll find us.
They'll
for
find
sure.
us. They'll find us.
But
Share this video. Get it out there. Let's get these numbers up. And John has great things to say here, and they certainly can't stop you from sharing. So let's get it out there, guys. If you like this video, you can let us know that you did by hitting that thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, we always love when you take the time to do that. Hit the alert bell. You'll know when we upload content just like this. We also have an amazing referral network all around the country and probably a city close to you.
Yep.
Our network is growing. If you're looking to buy a house or sell a house or rent a house, or you're a landlord and you want us to represent you for that too, we can do it. If you're in Maryland, we're your we are your company. But if you're anywhere outside of Maryland, you can click on the map of the U.S. And if you like our gear, our cool gear, we'll plug this show brought to you by SachsRealty.shop. You can buy one of these cool quarter zips that Melissa and I sport
Every week.
just about.
Yeah. Awesome.
Almost every week.
Almost every week.
Anyway,
Yeah.
we love you guys. We appreciate you. And until next week, see you soon.
See you soon.